I'm Donna Butts. I'm the Executive Director of Generations United, and it's always difficult for me to sit when I speak, so I'll try to
Feel free to stand.
And then I have to hold this, so we'll see. We'll see. So Generations United and the Grey Panthers have so much in common. Whenever I think about your mission and the work that you do and Generations United, I think about how united we actually are. Generations United was founded 25 years ago, and we were founded at a time when people were trying to pit the generations against each other. And some of you will remember those days. There was a journal that had a picture of an older adult and a young person, and they were dressed in battle fatigues. They each had a gun, they were back to back, and basically the message was, march 10 paces, turn and shoot. Whoever's left gets our country's scarce resources and gets the support that they deserve. Well, our founders, which were the Children's Defense Fund, the Child Welfare League of America, AARP, and the National Council on Aging, came together and said, no, we can and should support our country's most valuable and vulnerable populations. What I call our bookend generations, those that hold our civil society together, our youngest and our oldest. So our work has been to really protect that social compact between generations. And whenever we see somebody trying to pit generations against each other, to take a stand, to speak up and make sure that people know we are stronger together, we're better together, and our country can and should embrace people of all ages. So the topic that I was asked to talk a little bit about today is ageism. And what's interesting about ageism as compared to every other ism, it is the one ism that if we're fortunate, we'll all experience. We're all gonna get older. We may not all be a different race, we may not all experience sexism, we may not be homophobic, but we will be older. And so what's interesting when you think about the isms too is progress that we have made in some ways hasn't really necessarily been made when we think about ageism. I mean, it's still okay to have, I was just reading yesterday about a new movie that's coming out called, I think it's called Grumpy Grandpa or something like that, or Scary Grandpa. And the description that I read of it basically talked about this older gentleman who passed gas and leered at young women. And so there's just all of these things, but you would not really necessarily get away with doing a movie like that, about some of the other isms that we're talking about. And I don't know about you, but some people think it's cute, but I think Betty White's great, but I really don't like her show. Yeah. I think older adults have a whole lot more to do than try to pull tricks on young people, and they've got a lot more going for them than that. So I think some of the ways that we trivialize or stereotype people by age is extremely dangerous. But what we also know is that if people have never had a chance to really see each other or know each other, then those things perpetuate. I was doing the Intergenerational Games in San Diego County one year. That was a wake-up call to me because all of a sudden I realized I was the older person on the team. And so we did all the games, and afterwards when they were interviewing some of the children, one of them said, "This was great. I never realized anybody over the age of 50 ever got off the couch." But that was what they'd been exposed to, that was what they'd seen. Now that's why one of the reasons at Generations United, what we really advocate for are shared sites and shared space that connect generations rather than separate them. So for example, it could be an adult daycare center with a child care center. It could be a school like in Swampscott, Massachusetts, where they built a high school and a senior center together because the community had resources to be able to do that. And what's happened is the natural connection and involvement in each other's lives. So we're using resources to connect generations rather than separate them. What I say whenever I look at a senior-only community, and I've been beat up about this at times because I really don't think it's healthy, and people say, well, there should be choice. Well, there are some things we don't have choices about in this country because it's been proven that it's not healthy for us. We wear seatbelts, we don't drink and drive. If we know that isolating people by age is not healthy for them, then I really am not, I don't have a problem saying I don't believe in it, I don't agree with it. What happens when you have an older adult community is that the conversation has a tendency to go to 3 Ps: pain, pills, and passing. It's what hurts, what medication you're on, and who died. And then you get a bunch of young people together, and they have a tendency to sort of gravitate to the 3 Ts, which are changing constantly. But the 3 Ts were Twilight, Twitter, and texting. Now I think it's tributes, and it's moved on. But what we have to do is really work to get the Ps and the Ts together, because that's what really makes our communities and our country strong. So it's that intergenerational lens when we're thinking about issues, when we're thinking about programs, because that's how we break down that ism. Because it's not that that's a young person you don't want to be with, or an older person that you don't want to be with. That's my friend. A child who's been in intergenerational programs is as likely to look at a picture of somebody who's 7 and a picture of somebody who's 70 and say, that's my friend. So it's breaking down those isms by making sure that we get together. And one last point I'll make has to do, because I know we want to really have a chance to have a dialogue, has to do with the role of policy and practice. I've talked a little bit about intergenerational programs, but we really need to look at our policy with an intergenerational lens as well. Now, many of you know, and I know you've already been hearing from people talking about Social Security, and I hope that somebody did point out the fact that 7 million children live in households that depend all or in part on Social Security to support that household. And yet people try to isolate Social Security and say it's a retirement program. In fact, it's a family support program. It's one that strengthens our communities and our families, so we need to frame it and think about it like that. But another area is we've been so good at siloing and segregating policy that we have gotten really uncreative about how we meet the needs in our country and how we address the issues that we have in our country. And I think a perfect example is one that when our signature report comes out in December this year, we're going to highlight, and that has to do with something we've been thinking about along the lines of housing. Now, I seem to recall that Maggie Kuhn did some home sharing in her later life. And it's something that's been very popular more in Europe than it has been in the US. But what I say is step back, think about an intergenerational lens. And we have a couple of really big issues in this country. One is we have an aging population that wants to age in place. They want to stay in their own homes. That's where their biggest asset is. And then we have this huge, huge student debt issue. Young people that are just really, really buckling under the weight of trying to pay off student debt. Why can't we do something similar to what they did in Spain? In Spain, when they introduced home sharing, basically young people who agreed to share a home with an older adult and perform agreed upon tasks to help that older person stay in their own home get free university tuition. Why can't we in this country think about that sort of service, that young people who are graduating could get a point off of their student loan debt if they agreed either in a community to help a few houses that were near them or actually shared a home with an older adult? Can we do something like that?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. We can, because we think about breaking down those silos of age. And we think about how do we realize that people are much stronger when we're connected and when we are working on things together. So it's using that intergenerational lens when we think about policy, when we think about practice, because it's when people meet each other that we forget the isms. That's when friendships happen. That's when that face becomes somebody we know. And my favorite example of that, before I close, is a program that I ran probably 25 or 30 years ago in Oregon. And it was a program where we took high school sociology students to meet with low-income, isolated older adults who were still in their own homes. And they would spend a semester together and develop these great, deep friendships. And we got a picture on the front page of the local paper one day, and what it was a young man with the older woman that he had been visiting for many, many weeks. She had silver hair, and she's reaching across the table to pat his hand. And he just happened to have on a black leather jacket and an orange mohawk haircut. And the heading was, "He may look a little strange, but he's such a nice boy." Thank you.
I was alone perfectly. I was a sweet sunrise on a perfect day. I was a spider's web. I was a sparrow's